Hello, folks. Welcome back to English 420 Comparative Literature. This will be a video lecture on Module 2 of Mulk Anand's Untouchable. Excuse me, I should probably start out by giving you a disclaimer. Back in June, I contracted COVID, and one of the peculiar side effects is that I have like this kind of not cough, but kind of just periodically itchy throat, if you will. So I apologize in advance if my voice is somewhat awkward, faltering through this. So like I said, this is a video on this novel, The Untouchable. I'll be using this paperback, but there is another Penguin edition, which of course has different page numbers, as I mentioned. Either one are fine, but the page numbers I'll refer to are in this particular edition. So down in what would be Module 2, because you should have already completed the quiz, which most of you did, for critical race theory. But this Module 2 is over the novel Untouchable. So you should be reading the novel. If you have not already started, you're kind of behind. This assignment in Module 2 is due, as you can see, a little less than 2 weeks from now, September 12th. And it's a 3 to 5 double-spaced essay. And number 3 says you can use any slides and resources for this video lecture, which I'm just now recording and will post in Canvas and announce to you in your inbox. But if you click this slides and resources, what you will be taken to is our course Google folder, if you will. And there's a bunch of files in each of these folders that I will use for these video lectures. So, you can refer back to them. There's also videos and some PDF files and so on. Anyhow, there's a video lecture on how to avoid plagiarism. This is a senior level English course, English 420. However, I've noticed that there are only 7 out of 25 students who are actually English majors. That's a bit concerning for me because this is not a writing course where I'm going to teach you how to write an essay. It's going to assume, because it's already a senior level English course, that you already know how to write college level essays with documentation and citation. But as a reminder, there's this video lecture on how to avoid plagiarism, as well as a sample paper of how to format your paper. If you click that link, it'll take you to this sample MLA style paper. We're using MLA style. You will have lots of points deducted if you use APA style. I'll say that one more time. You will have lots of points deducted if you do not use MLA style. This is an English course in the humanities, not a science course. If you're unsure of style issues in MLA, refer to Purdue's online writing lab, or OWL, and submit your paper as a Microsoft Word or .docx file. That's the only, as it says there, the module only accept .docx files. So if you write it in Google Docs, which I don't care you do, save it as a Microsoft Word document and upload the file. Do not try to send a Google Docs link or any other kind of link. And as I mentioned up above in the syllabus under the technology section, you all have current, free access to Office 365, which includes Microsoft Word, accessing through either the portal or your, Office 365 link. Okay, so let's look at some background information. If you were to click on this link here, this first one, both here on the syllabus, the PDF form of the syllabus, or in the actual module 2 itself in Canvas, you'll be taken to this PDF file. And what I've tried to do is take out the guesswork for you, be very prescriptive, like a doctor would prescribe a dosage of medicine. So this is your basic 5-paragraph essay. I'm telling you to follow this outline, not your own outline, not some other outline you find, but this outline. And you will come out with a solid paper if you do. So it's, again, introduction, which should contain your thesis, and your thesis should contain 3 main points about whatever topic you choose. Logical transition sentences, not words, in between paragraphs. Your body, which I've color-coded to the 3 main ideas in your thesis. Your body paragraphs will explain with evidence from the text, right? Specific example, fact, quotation, right? How it supports that idea. And then, of course, a conclusion. Pretty simple, basic college kind of essay. Really, honestly, high school. Let's be honest. So on the second page of this are the topics you can write on. Just choose one. And what I will do in this video lecture is kind of go through each one of these and explain with detailed examples and passages and page numbers where and how you can find evidence to support your main body paragraphs in your essay. It's just a matter of following along. The advantage of having a video lecture is that you can go back and rewind, rewatch as necessary, and that is not true in, say, a lecture setting where you have a kind of one-off where you have to take meticulous notes. Okay, so I'm going to, before I dive into this first one about Hindu religion, give you some background information on how to sort of understand both India and the novel, because of course the novel is set in India. And I'm going to do that first with a number of images that I normally use to teach in a world literature class a portion of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is a much smaller portion of an ancient Hindu Sanskrit text called the Mahabharata. So the Mahabharata is the much longer sacred text of the Hindu religion. And inside of that is this story of Krishna here with the general Arjuna. This is actually a male god, even though he has makeup on. I'll explain that all in a moment. So we're not doing the Mahabharata, but a lot of the images and slides here I have helped to kind of inform the Hinduism that you encounter in the novel. So let me just start here at the beginning. And what I mean by that is the beginning of, wait, sorry, better not use that. Beginning of language, really. So this is, sorry, I don't have a better version of it. It's something you can find, though, on the back flyleaf of the American Heritage Dictionary. And it shows what's called the Proto-Indo-European language diagram or chart. So proto meaning, of course, before, and Indo meaning the basic root of, our language, which is actually, Indian based. And then the branching from what we know as Western culture or European cultures. And as you can see, if we sort of just kind of zoom in here, modern English over here on the left, before it became modern English, was Middle English, say, of Chaucer. Actually, Shakespeare is considered modern English, early modern English. Chaucer in his Canterbury Tales, if you ever read that in high school, Juan de Abril de Perixota de Persetu Rota. That's still English, but it's in a different pronunciation and dialect than we're used to. And then certainly Old English that you probably would not have read in the original if you ever read Beowulf, but Beowulf is in fact Old English, as in that was stale cheda ridden sita fraknafu draka fata yemendeg. Sounds like a totally foreign language, right? But the roots of many of those words, like fu draka that I just said, fire dragon, is talking or describing about when Beowulf meets the dragon that, of course, spits fire. But Old English comes from West Germanic language, and then generally speaking, going back from Germanic as a whole, and then back to, again, the sort of root of, this Proto-Indo-European. But over here, if we go to the Indo-Iranian, we will see here the Indic or Indian kind of root, and then the Sanskrit. So far off to the right here, though, you'll see the current dominant shooting off of Sanskrit Indian languages, the primary one being Hindi. Hindi is the language, Hinduism is the religion that Hindus practice. Another very dominant language, pervasive language in India is Urdu and Bengali, Punjabi. So some of the words that you encounter in the novel, Baka's name, Alaka, or Sahib, and so on, come from, this Hindi language, which traces its roots back to Sanskrit. So India, well, it's a giant country. It's actually called the subcontinent, and the continent, of course, would be Asia. But it's, like the United States, though it's much smaller than the United States. It's very vast in its topography and terrain, with, long coastlines and mountains and valleys and rivers and whatnot. So there are distinct sort of features of India that kind of inform the novel in different ways. So here's the plain of Ganges, and what they're referring to here is the Ganges River that flows all the way, see, it says mouth of the Ganges. Think of, the rough equivalent in the United States or North America as the Mississippi, where we have this long kind of, the Missouri River, the Ohio River, kind of, form. Eventually it would become the Mississippi River and then the Mississippi Delta, where New Orleans is, right? But the Ganges River is not only important because it kind of makes a kind of, shadow appearance, if you will, in the novel, but It's important to know that it's considered a sacred river by Hindus, and therefore there's a kind of not kind of, there's an actual like pilgrimage to try to annually go cleanse yourself into the Ganges because it's considered sacred. So there's right there the Taj Mahal near the current capital called New Delhi. A friend of mine, Padma Raghavarajan, who was a colleague of mine at UC Boulder before I came to Grambling. Here she is cooking one of her meals. You know, she's a Brahmin and they're vegetarian. She's now at UC Riverside with her husband Manu, and here is Padma and her husband Manu. And she had gone back to India because they were getting married in India. That's why she's got this beautiful sari on. And here we are. I'm here on the left, back where my hair was a little bit longer, going to the Denver Opera because we're, again, both of us teaching at University of Colorado at Boulder, and her husband Manu, we all liked the opera, so we went. This is an image not of an Indian woman, but of an Afghanistan woman. And as you can see, taken from National Geographic a long time ago. But the reason I'm showing this to you is because one of the questions I pose, let me go back to the PDF file here. Here is what degree does colorism within Indian caste function as a mechanism of oppression throughout the novel? So, there is colorism in many different forms and civilizations and races, right? Even within races. And so what I'm asking you to think of in this novel, if you want to answer that question, is to what degree does lighter skin or darker skin, function as a mechanism of oppression? And if so, how and where can we see that in the novel? But anyhow, this woman, you might think of her, look at her as like a European, Eastern European woman, like Slavic or something, but no, she's actually from Afghanistan. Now, keep in mind, if I go back to the map here, you'll see that Afghanistan is, a Middle Eastern country, but it's very close to India. So how does she end up looking, fair skin, Caucasian features, and light green eyes? Well, oh, by the way, here she is when she's older holding a photograph of herself. And she was only 33, the age of 33 at this, because Afghanistan women and people have a very difficult and tough life, hard physically on their bodies, as it is for the characters in this novel. So here is a map of, what we call the Indo-Aryan migration. Now notice the date though, right? 1750 BC. This is about the same time that the Bible, as the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, we properly call it, say Moses's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, was being put together as a text. So about the same time, you had a group of people, excuse me, moving from, roughly the Caucasus, which is a mountain chain near Russia, moving sort of south and eastwardly through the Hindu Kush, present day Pakistan, across the Indus River right here. This is where, of course, India gets its name, the Indus River, and then eventually to India. And there's the Ganges again. And it's important to know that when we say Aryan here, we are not we're using it here in the proper originary sense. That is, people from the, again, Caucasus Mountains. And let me just show you what I mean by that. If I can, there we go. Sorry about that. So it's a mountain chain that is in, say, roughly present-day Georgia, the country of Georgia, not the state, right? So you have, on one side the Black Sea, and the other side the Caspian Sea. This is the Caucasus Mountains, and so Georgia is a, former, Soviet country. Here's the actual, Russian Federation. Uh, and so this is where, these people would have migrated from when we're talking about this map. And, well, I guess I lost my, sorry. We're talking here about migration that occurs over centuries, really, right? But what this helps to account for is the different shades or skin tones of people in India. You will have lighter skinned people and darker skinned people. So in the Aryan sense of people using it today, and neo-Nazism or white supremacy, it's a kind of bastardization, misappropriation from its original, kind of migratory sense from the people from the Caucasoid Mountains. Though, of course, the Caucasoids, kind of are in Eastern Europe. So one of the things that we need to really talk a lot about here and you to understand is that this novel is deliberately shoring up the caste system, caste with an E at the end, of Hinduism. And so you'll see here color-coded, you have the Aryans, the people who have lighter skin, divided into what we might think of as classes, but they're actually, uh, sort of like a religious category, as Hinduism will describe. And at the top are the Brahmins, who are typically of the priestly class, or doctors, professors. And when I say doctors, I mean like physicians. And like my friend Padma, who, her father was or is a physician. She is a professor, and she's a Brahmin, as is her husband. The next class below that, Kshatras, who are the warrior class, the sort of military arm or function of India. And what you have to remember about these castes is that once you're born into that caste, your parents are Brahmin or your parents are Kshatriyas, you are automatically of the same caste. So it's this hereditary system that is built into Indian culture and religion. The Vaishyas, who are, sort of what we might think of as working class people, farmers, merchants, craftspeople, kind of in the middle here. And then you have Sudras, who are farm workers, servants, and laborers. And notice these are color-coded, these are non-laborers. But not even listed on this diagram is an entirely different caste who are literally outcasts, meaning they don't even appear on this. And they're called the Dalits, or outcasts, or as the novel is entitled, Untouchables. So here's another diagram to help put it into perspective. The Brahmins are at the top. The Kshatriyas, warriors, are below the Brahmins. The Vaishyas, right, are sort of, in the middle here. Most of us might identify with this category as, if you're a shop owner, a merchant, a worker of that kind, you would fall in here. Uh, day laborers, like manual labor, say construction people or people who build roads or that kind of thing. They would be part of the Sudra class. But then down at the very, very bottom, as I mentioned, outside of the caste are the Dalits. And this is the caste into which our protagonist, Baka, is born. Um, he is one of the outcasts and therefore one of the untouchables. Um, so here is an actual untouchable or Dalit. You can see it's a photograph taken by National Geographic. But the reason she has her face covered is because it is, according to tradition, mandatory for anyone who is of a higher caste than her or a Dalit to cover their face in the presence of people who are other or higher. She also has the standard sort of reeded sweeping broom or brush, and that is what they use to this very day to clean the streets, because as the image said here at the bottom right, uh, they have the unpleasant jobs of cleaning and leather tanning. And by cleaning, they mean cleaning largely animal and human defecation. So sometimes there's this term used, manual scavenger, and they're scavenging for uh, both human and animal feces, as we will see. Um, and this all stems from the religion of Hinduism, as I mentioned a moment ago. But as you can see, it's a fairly old religion, say about the same time, like I mentioned earlier, um, the Hebrew Bible of Judaism is being put together, is about the time, Sanskrit and sacred, the Upanishad texts were being written and recited. So it's roughly Hinduism, roughly about the age of, Greek gods and goddesses. Fairly old, but of course not as old as Egyptian, religion or polytheism, and certainly not as old as Sumerian or Akkadian polytheism, let's say Gilgamesh. The topography satellite image of India. If you've never tried Indian food, some of which is mentioned specifically in this novel, I highly recommend you try it. There are different, just like you have in a large country like the United States, many different cuisines, if you will. So here is a depiction of Vishnu, of the supreme God. And what you have here is down at the bottom, during this part of the Mahabharata called the Bhagavad Gita that I mentioned earlier, you have the god Arjuna. Excuse me, I'm sorry. You have the general Arjuna right here. He's a warrior of the Kshatriya class, asking it's escaping me for the moment. It's terrible. sorry, it'll come to me. It's terrible. It'll come to me in a moment when I go to another slide. Let me just go to, do I have it here? Yeah, sorry. Lord Krishna, how can I forget that? So he's asking Lord Krishna to reveal himself in his true form. And when he does so, he explodes into this kind of profusion of incarnations of different gods and goddesses. So allegedly, according to Hinduism, there's 333,000 different gods and goddesses in Hinduism. So it's a polytheistic religion, and including, Ganesh here with the elephant head, and many other, powerful gods and goddesses. So Krishna is just one incarnation, if you will, of the larger Vishnu god. So this is the Taj Mahal that I mentioned earlier. Probably that's the most iconic landmark in India, made out of marble, not far from the capital. A gift from a prince to his wife. And this is one of the gods, Shiva, who is both simultaneously creator and destroyer. Here is another incarnation of Shiva. And what I want you to sort of get from this is, in his hand, he has the Om symbol, which you may sort of know if you know yoga, if you know Buddhism, which has a little bit of overlap with Hinduism. But he's got the drum to symbolize his like heartbeat of the universe, but also the cobra wrapped around his neck as the destroyer. And behind this representation of Shiva is a bull or cow, to remind us that in Hinduism, the cow or the bull or bovine, they're considered sacred in Hinduism. And therefore, Hindus do not eat beef. Just like Jews do not eat pork, Muslims do not eat pork, Hindus do not eat beef. Most of them are vegetarian. But if they eat any meat, it might be chicken, could be pork, but typically not. Here's an incarnation of another God manifestation, one of the 333,000. But notice that it's on the right side, bare-chested. This is Shiva, the male god there again with the drum. But on the right side is a female, his wife. And this is just a reminder that they long ago had this sort of notion that there's sort of perhaps what we might call today a third gender or transgender, two in one, body and spirit. So you will find this is an actual statue. You will find around India the worship of these gods and goddesses, just like you might find large crucifixes or statues. I just want to show you that there are people down here to give you a sense of the scale of this statue. And there are people around the globe who have converted to Hinduism, as there are people who practice Buddhism and other kinds of religion. This is another statue. You can see people gathering in front of it to pay homage, just like you would if you were to see, you're a Catholic and you see a statue of the Virgin Mary. There again is Krishna and Arjuna. So that's a kind of brief background, not really fully, of Hinduism and India. Now I want to move on to the novel. So, oops. This is the image used on the cover of our novel, and it shows an actual Dalit, person of a untouchable class, if you will. This is not our novel, but this novel is specifically alluded to in the opening of our text. Like 4-page, not, yeah, we might say preface, if you will, by Ian Forster, the British novelist. And we start with that because, well, one of the questions that I ask you all to think about on the essay questions is how and or in what ways does the specter of colonial oppression lurking throughout the novel, right? So Forster, as a British novelist, has sort of pride of place in the opening of this novel as a kind of preface, and he describes briefly the novel and Baka, the character, the protagonist. But I want you to think about the kind of residual effect, if you will, of British colonialism in India. And there he is, Ian Forster. Another person we need to talk about in the novel who isn't never named is B.R. Ambedkar, shown here at Columbia University. He was an Indian. He studied abroad, both in London and in New York. And he's often kind of put on a playing field, if you will, with Mahatma Gandhi, who's on the right side here. In other words, these two men are largely responsible for the national independence of India as a country away from Britain. And they're not given the same amount of attention or treatment in this novel, however. In the other edition of the Penguin version of this novel, there's quite a bit of discussion in the introduction about Ambedkar and his role in championing the Untouchables cause. At the end of this novel, Gandhi makes an actual appearance, so he kind of plays a cameo role, but it's in some ways the novel is leading up to Gandhi, but Gandhi as this kind of larger than life, almost saint-like figure. In fact, that's what Mahatma means, saint-like, is kind of a bit put on a pedestal here by our author Anand. In fact, Anand shared the manuscript chapter by chapter with Gandhi as he was completing it. But here is Ambedkar giving the completed draft of the Indian Constitution that we have today in India to the then chairman of the assembly, or our version of a Congress. So Ambedkar was really kind of an important figure that's kind of given short shrift in this novel. There's a section I'll point out later that we could, in other words, the poet toward the end of the novel could be read as Ambedkar. But you can see here they have a statue to him, they have portraits of him in the assembly, people paying their respects to helping India out of its plight along with, commemorative stamps and so on. So this is the cover of the version we're actually using, same photograph though. And there is the author himself, Mulk Raj Anand. So I'm going to show you a bunch of images of India to kind of get it into your head about, what's going on in the novel, imagery wise and setting. So this would be, a Dalit, someone who kind of is like a street person because of how the Hindu caste system works. They are required to wash their clothes by hand. It's a very kind of rough life. And this, by the way, still goes on in these outdoor kind of open wash. And we have a washing scene, with what's her name? Gulab, is it? When Shohini, excuse me, Gulabo, I'm beginning about page 24. Gulaba, the washerwoman, berates Sohini for being a prostitute, which she's not. And this image is also of a group of Dalits in the southwestern coast of India. And what I want you to sort of notice is their physicality. This again speaks to the colorism question. So, they are a darker skin and their hair isn't straight like, the Afghanistan woman's, nor are their eyes of light color. And you might ask, well, why is that? Well, it's a simple matter of human migration. So I think many of you know, if you don't know, that as far as we know, the paleontological record, the fossil record, if you will, shows that we can trace the earliest origins of Homo sapiens and even before that, all back to Africa, right? So when you see here like M60, we're talking 60,000 years ago, right? And what you're seeing with these arrows is the accepted scientific migration patterns over a period of thousands of years. So, it's not surprising that you see from Africa down through India, right here, right, following roughly the Persian Gulf, and then further through the southeastern Asian countries like, Sumatra and Singapore and so on, and then down to, say, Australia, that there will be people of color. Similarly, if you go from Asia all the way across the Bering Strait, there used to be, an ice bridge tens of thousands of years ago, and people could literally walk across what is today, a strait or a part of the sea between present-day Russia and Alaska. But then they made their way down into North America and eventually South America. This is, how the globe was populated. So it's not surprising that if you look at people, say, from South America, from Peru or Ecuador, that they are people of smaller stature with darker skin and dark hair and dark eyes that would have been similar to people from Asia. Nor is it surprising that if, for example, you look at native or indigenous or aboriginal people of Australia, right, that they don't look like, Crocodile Dundee. They look like people who may have over thousands of years come from Africa. So Here are a bunch of old and contemporary, new Aboriginal or indigenous people from Australia. And when I said like Crocodile Dundee, that's because over here, Australia, right, shown here in red or kind of pink almost, was one of the countries that, of course, Britain colonized. As you can see from this map, that's I believe it was 1886. Let's see at the bottom here. So yeah, the British Empire in 1886. And so if you've ever heard the catchphrase, the sun never sets on the British Empire, this is what they were talking about. So the 1880s, or the Victorian era, we might call it, was the height of the British colonial expansion throughout the world. And so at every latitude, every longitude, or I think of time zone, is somewhere that is colonized or owned at the time by Britain. So there's New Zealand, the Fiji Islands, New Guinea, Australia, parts of what are present day Hong Kong, India, of course, which is what we're mainly talking about in the novel. Then Africa, South Africa and parts of Western Africa from the West African slave trade. Of course, Britain itself, Canada, the entire, at one point, 13 colonies. So, it has a pretty pervasive foothold on many lands and territories, represented by all of these stereotyped caricatures, like here, this, Indian and Middle Eastern kind of with the Tommy, as he's called, right? This is when you think of the British soldiers referred to as Tommies in the novel, this is what is being referred to, the British soldiers who have colonized India at the time, of an Indian woman here or a Polynesian woman here, sort of idolizing, looking up to quite literally this figure known as Britannia, the female embodiment of Britain. So here are people at the the Ganges River, right? They're fishing in a collective way. People, selling the wares out in the street just to get a sense of, what the streets are like. They're very crowded by our standards. You see the infrastructure is not like we have in the United States in terms of, electrical lines and codes and regulations and whatnot. Again, people bathing in the Ganges because it's considered a sacred river. Laborers, the Taj Mahal again, these sacred bovines, right? Festivals of various kinds, temples, Hindi temples, various modes of transportation with, people, as many people as you can get because it's difficult to get around. Most people don't own their own cars like we do in the United States. Cost of living is very low. Again, festivals, again, food. Again, if you haven't tried Indian food, you're missing out, I believe. You might think of this woman, though she's dressed much more nicely than Sohini. You might think of this woman as Sohini because she's construed as attractive in the novel. And she's, younger than 18-year-old Baka, the protagonist, maybe you'd say 16. There's Shiva again. So this is what I wanted to mention about the divinity, if you will, of the cows or bovine. Because they're considered sacred, they quite literally wander everywhere. Um, and therefore, think about it. When a cow poops, defecates in the street, someone has to clean it up, right? Therefore, you have a ready-made job for Dalits, the Untouchables. This is a well, obviously, people gathering their water because, again, infrastructure is not the same as it is. And, this is part of that question. I think it's the second question here about indoor plumbing, right? Really about toilets, with solving the public health crisis of a lack of indoor plumbing or having flushable toilets, diminish or erase racism. I tend to think not, perhaps because of the Hindu caste system, but that's at least at the end of the novel what Gandhi says. The machine, as he says, um, will help eliminate this kind of thing. Where if you remember, Sohini, the younger sister of, let me just find that. Let's see, on page 23. I'll begin at the bottom of 22, last paragraph. The outcasts were not allowed to mount the platform surrounding the well, because if they were to ever draw water from it, the Hindus of the three upper castes would consider the water polluted, nor were they allowed access to the nearby brook, as use of it would contaminate the stream. They had no well of their own because it cost at least 1,000 rupees, the currency of India, to dig a well in such a hilly town as Bulashah. Perforce, or therefore automatically, they had to collect at the foot of the caste Hindus' well and depend on the bounty of some of their superiors to pour water into their pitchers. And skipping down a few lines. So the outcasts had to wait for chance or fate to bring some caste Hindu to the well, for luck to decide that he was kind, for fate to ordain that he had time to get their pitchers filled with water. And this kind of thing still goes on today, folks. So, one of the things that I want to reiterate that you encountered in that critical race theory quiz, but also chapter 1 and 2, is that one of the principles of critical race theory says that racism is ordinary. And what I mean by that, or they mean by that, is that it's common to human nature, to human beings in general, regardless of historical time and geographical region. And so here you have in the novel, you have the upper caste, particularly the Brahmins, being called masters, whereas the Dalits, the Untouchables, are like quite literal slaves, being, in this case, waiting to get water from the well. But this also causes all kinds of health problems. And, one of the things that I refer to, in that number 2 here, right, about lack of indoor plumbing, is the fact that, you can go look it up today. There's something like, I think there's like 1.2 billion people, that's with a B, 1.2 billion people in India, and something like 700 million, so, approaching a billion, do not have access to toilets. So this is a file in your folder if you want to use this as a source in your essay. And this organization, it's a non-government organization or NGO, WaterAid, was really begun initially by the UN. It's now spun off to be worldwide. But here, for example, 2.3 billion people worldwide, almost 1 in 3, such a normal part of having flushing toilets, is out of reach. A lack of decent toilets and clean water causes diarrhea, diarrheal disease that on average claim the lives of almost 800 children every day, 1 every 2 minutes. And this is, a 2017 report. Here's this young girl. She's, as it says here from the caption, she's in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is just east of India, so it's literally shares a border with India. A lot of historical culture too. But notice she's just walking basically next to an open sewage, right, or sewer, which cannot be healthy in any sense. Here, working our way down this chain here, what is a service ladder. So there's roughly, if we look at the what is it called, the world population clock. I think the census has one. So from our United States Census, what this is on the right-hand side, an ongoing meter, if you will, like an odometer in a car, of the world population, about to hit 8 billion pretty soon. This means that, this is a human being born about every second. The same is true over here on the left-hand side of, sorry. So I have to reload this page. This is based on, what we call an accretion of data, a buildup of data of every, 8 to 9 seconds, a human being is born. And then every, say 12 seconds in the United States, a human dies, right? You can see right here. And we also have these kind of statistics for various countries around the globe. So if there's roughly 7.9 billion people on the planet, right, which is a lot, this page is causing my browser to stall. We here in places like the United States, or what we call developed countries, have access to safely managed toilets, right, where waste is treated and disposed of safely. Below that, 2.2 billion have, something like an outhouse, a latrine, right? But it's not really safe because it ends up often going into rivers or tributaries, right? It becomes part of the water table of the land and therefore risking disease. Roughly 8%, 600 million. They have some kind of toilet, but you might share that among several households, which obviously is not very sanitary and can transmit disease easily. Like, imagine, when you go to a porta potty, you're sharing it with many, many people. It's not very sanitary. Or, 881 million people have a toilet, but it just like goes right into the nearby water source, and therefore causes all kinds of disease, diphtheria and typhoid and other kinds of problems. And then an even worse problem, of course, is that still over 800 million people worldwide openly defecate. because they don't have access to a latrine, much less a flushing toilet. So this is a a real issue around the globe, especially for women, right? Women have to be very careful about when and where they use the restroom because they're physically exposed, or men, depending on if they're just urinating, they don't have to be as exposed. um, so they're subject to physical violence. There is in the novel some sexual abuse or molestation by the daughter, not by, but to or on the daughter Sohini by, ironically, a Hindu priest. Um, and if I scroll further down, you can see here that in terms of the worst countries for access to basic sanitation, India remains, right? The 700 plus million. And so this is only in 2017, just a few years ago. And so that number remains pretty high. Um, so again, you're welcome to use this document if you want to talk about this issue of the public health crisis in the novel, as a source. So let me continue with these slides, these images. So people living in a very kind of open air system because, again, most people don't have much electricity and certainly not air conditioning. This is an old Life magazine photograph, but of an actual Dalit. It's what we might call hand-to-mouth living. But again, this is sanctioned, if you will, by, and notice the color of her skin, it's darker. It's sanctioned by the religion of Hinduism itself. And the reason why is because Hindus believe in this, well, I should back up and say, in terms of the caste system, the reason the Brahmins are at the top is because, according to Hindu belief, they have lived in the past life or lives, however many past lives there are, they have lived good enough lives in the past that they are now at the top, and therefore they deserve to be at the top. If you're in the middle or at the bottom, you somehow have not lived a proper or close to perfect life, and therefore you deserve to be in the middle or at the bottom. And therefore the logic stands that you as a Dalit down at the very bottom, or literally out of the caste, deserve to be there because you've done something in the past, in your past or past lives, that was unsavory, shall we say, or it's that notion of karma, which we all sort of know, reinforcing itself in a caste system, that if you do something bad in this life, it will come to haunt you, so to speak, in a future life, because again, they believe in reincarnation. And that is all, in Hinduism, all part of the larger, what we call dharmic order of Dharma. These girls here on an outdoor swing, but again, notice there's, the bovine, and the child here just out completely nude. And the boys out there swimming in the, rivers that are not very sanitary, especially when people wash in them, and cows defecate in them. People traveling on foot and like a pilgrimage to the banks of the Ganges, right? Because again, it's a sacred place. People washing their clothes in the Ganges. in this annual kind of pilgrimage. Again, not very kind of sanitary. Now, one of the reasons I'm showing you these images here is because this is a kind of life that both Baka, well, all three of the children, Baka, who's the oldest and the protagonist, Raka, his next oldest brother, who's kind of briefly mentioned in the novel, and then Sohini, the younger sister. This is the kind of life that they lack, that is access to education. Because, again, the caste system says they deserve not to be educated. But it's still rare for poor families of, say, the Sudras or the Dalits to actually have their girls go to school. And it's even rare for girls to, go to college. I have a good friend who lived in India for several years with his wife in Mumbai. And he said that driving in India is like, there are no rules. We have very kind of rigid, like, even though there are traffic signs, right? People just go at will, drive at will. The only rule is don't ever hit anyone, which is kind of hard to do. There's a camel in the middle of the street, right? Somebody's going to clean that up. Would be a Dalit. The hookah, they're probably not smoking tobacco, but probably maybe some form of hashish or even maybe opium. Again, in the river, along with the cattle. Again, not very sanitary. But if you don't have running water, right, because you have lack of infrastructure, what are you going to do? Another Dalit woman, again, living, kind of hand to mouth, subsistence. And like I said earlier, so this is kind of rare for women, girls to go to college or what we call high school. And there's a push, and has been for a long time, to get women more equality, but still, if you think the United States still has a lack of inequality, a country like India has much, much further to go in terms of gender and sex equality, as you can see here, right? So that's like Sohini going to the well, getting water because you don't have running water, or carrying around your food, right? Or Dalit woman covering her face like Sohini would have to. The basic kind of rural modes of transportation other than walking, right? Bicycle, if you're lucky to have one. Motorcycle, that meant that you were not a Dalit. Most Dalits or Untouchables don't have motorcycles or access to them. That would be someone of a higher caste. And certainly, the money to pay for some, transportation. So yeah, I'm hoping you're getting a sense of Dalits and their life here. And this is juxtaposed, this lifestyle is juxtaposed to the very kind of opulent and upper caste of the Brahmins here. This is a Brahmin wedding. Many of you may have seen these very kind of stylized and ritualized weddings that are ornate and understandably a cause for celebration, with henna tattoos and so on. But Dalits really don't get to participate in this kind of opulence because they don't have the money, obviously. So this is, the flooding of the Ganges River that happens periodically, but again, it's not sanitary. If it gets into the streets and sidewalks and stores, it's a problem. Yeah. So again, the streets are very crowded. Cows, bovines just walking around, doing their thing. This would actually be prostitutes as the reds kind of pawn or candles indicate, there is prostitution, unfortunately, in India. And what I mean by that, unfortunately, is unlike in, say, the state of Nevada, where it's legal and women can choose to consensually engage in prostitution where it's legal, these women typically are coerced into it, basically kind of human trafficking situation. There again, bovine, in that case, a Brahman bull in the middle of the sidewalk, man washing himself in the river. Um, um, that's because you don't have, again, your own running water. Sheep being herded in the middle of the street. So, it's a very different life, obviously, than we're used to. So a Hindu temple, there's, Shiva again on it. And this is all sort of juxtaposed to in pockets of India, like the cities, the urban centers of a very progressive and kind of modern India. Here in the background, a camel, and there's a cell phone. You'll have people on, bicycles and motorcycles, and living, in, say, maybe driving a rickshaw like this, or uh, living in a place like this. They're over here playing chess, but they may have a cell phone, right? Because there's a giant telecommunications company in India. This is, interview, I think, with famous actors in what we call Bollywood, the sort of, Indian version of Hollywood. Here's a modern day mall in India. It looks like kind of one of our malls or any mall around, brightly lit and clean. Again, women of fashion and means have, jewelry and, beautiful saris, as they're called, SARI. Again, Bollywood actresses, and, a fairly, not as strong and expansive as our military, of course, but, the Indian military has, weapons that they buy from Europe and the United States. So, it's all kind of odd. There are, again, 700 plus million people without toilets, but they have jet fighters and, kind of schwanky Bollywood and fashion going on, right? Anyway, and soccer. They're huge fans of soccer. Though in this novel, the main sport, of course, is hockey, and they don't really mean hockey as in ice hockey, but what we might call field hockey or street hockey. So, as I mentioned, toward the end of this novel, Mahatma Gandhi makes an appearance at the end, and actually, speaks for a couple of pages. And this is the sort of famous, not in the novel, but maxim or adage from him: "Be the change." And what I'm asking in that novel, that essay question here in number 3 is, the political activist and Indian nationalist Mahatma Gandhi makes a cameo appearance in Untouchable, but does this message of untouchability as a sin help Baka, the protagonist, or other characters in any way throughout the novel? In other words, if we think of untouchability as a sin, which, if I just kind of jump to the chase, that's on page 147 of the novel. Does that notion end up helping the Dalits, right? And we mean sin here in the Hindu sense, right? It's kind of questionable that it does. That in other words, Gandhi makes an appearance, he makes a impassioned plea to get rid of, untouchability or the, outcast system, but, you know, it doesn't really, you could argue that Ambedkar, as I mentioned before, is really the one who helps with the Indian constitution uh, drive these democratizing forces home, which is why he's lauded in their assembly or Congress, if you will. So here's Gandhi growing up over here on the right side. He was born into, a somewhat well-to-do family. He was educated in London and became what's called an advocate or an attorney. So he learned law, right, in Britain. Remember, keep in mind that Britain had colonized India and it does not break away until 1947. Um, and so he becomes an attorney. Gandhi here does. And notice he is of darker skin, right? So he's relatable to Baka. In fact, Baka says, he's dark like me. But notice, he's not obviously of the Dalit class. He, doesn't live in that realm. Doesn't have to clean latrines. And he eventually starts. He eschews his kind of Western attire, suit and whatnot, for a more kind of traditional Indian attire, and eventually, takes on this almost ascetic life of living and eventually fasting, right, to show his political activism, right? So, he's talking about nonviolence here, and it remains, a national icon, for understandable means, to, not overthrow the Brahmins and the British colonialists with violence, but to do it through law and through measured kind of order, which Ambedkar also put forward. And so someone also you're familiar with, Martin Luther King Jr., also promoted nonviolence as well. And ironically, he's assassinated. And so there are, a couple of parallels between these two political activists. King having a portrait of Gandhi in one of his offices. But, these people all have strains of that kind of Gandhi, be the change, right? That was part of Barack Obama's first 2008, hope, hope for change, right? So, yeah, those are a lot of slides to help understand the, what do you call it, the novel. And let me just kind of go through, I know this has already gone on quite a long time, but I want to go through some of the questions here and help you find examples that you're going to, again, need for your actual essay. You can't just talk in generalities. You need to, as we do in literary essays, point specifically to page numbers and quotations in the text. So with regard to the first one about Hinduism, does Hinduism reinforce or perpetuate racism? This issue of Hinduism begins early on page 16. So for example, right in the middle of the page at 16, he, meaning Baka, was a low caste who seemed clean. Well, they're also referring to their Haldivar Charat Singh, who's works in the barracks but they're both of this, low caste or really outcast. And then down at the bottom of that same page, you have this footnote about, it says the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the two upper castes in Hindu society, justify their superiority by asserting that they have earned their position by the good deeds of multiple lives. So down at the bottom of 16, that's explaining to you what I was talking about earlier, that notion of the dharmic order of the castes, the dharmic order being the universal order according to Hinduism of, hey, this is how the universe operates, in the past life, if you believe in reincarnation, I did good things and therefore I and my family and my, progeny, children going forth, they will benefit from my good past lives, right? But it's almost this kind of absurd, locked in caste system, because if in fact you inherit this from your parents, which you do, then how is a Dalit, an outcast, ever supposed to get out of that? Because you're automatically born into it, right? It's a bit of a rigged system, you might say. So let's see, also on page 19, in sort of the middle of the page, it says, and he recalled the familiar sight of all those naked Hindu men and women who would be seen squatting in the open outside the city every morning. And he's referring here to, the lack of toilets, but also the fact that it's, Hindu men and women, because other people, there are in fact a small amount of Christians and Buddhists and other people in or religions in India, but the predominant people are Hindu, or the religion is. 22, 23, there's a more discussion of Hinduism when it comes to when Sohini is going to get the water, basically, right? Because remember, Hindus have to come to the well and be willing to, like a Brahmin, give the Dalits or outcasts water, right? So again, if if Hinduism is gone, would that erase the oppression or racism inherent in the caste system? I don't know. Just like saying, if the Bible, which Southerners in the United States taught, sort of justified in a distorted way, justified slavery, and then you got rid of Christianity, would that get rid of racism in the United States? And if you got rid of Christianity, would you get rid of racism? Hard to say. Beginning on page 26 through 30, really, you have the Pundit Kalinath, who's one of the priests in charge of the temple in the town. Not only sort of singles out Sohini as being attractive, right? But he gives her preferential treatment at the well. On page 29, he says, "Oh, you Laka's daughter," Laka is Sohini's father. "Oh, you Laka's daughter, come here," he said. "You have been patient, and the reward of patience, say the holy books, is supreme." And okay, it's like, pulling out a scripture from the Bible and using it to your advantage. But the reason he does this, we learn, is, on page 30 at the top, is that he wants her, because she's a young, attractive woman, 16 or so, or, okay, adolescent, but, of certainly, baby making age, if you will. He wants her to come to the temple, he says at the top on 30. "Look, why don't you come and clean the courtyard of the house of our, clean the courtyard of our house at the temple," called the Brahmin as the girl withdrew. "Tell your father to send you from today. And he looked at her rather embarrassed, his rigid respectability fighting against the waves of amorousness that had begun to show in his blood. Uh, so, it's this irony of a priest, a Hindu priest, who is, supposed to be treating people fairly and with respect, but he's really setting her up to molest her, which he does later, unfortunately. Um, and yeah, that's, let's see, occurs a bit later. Well, I'll get to it in a minute. I want to go to page 46. On 46 to 50, what you have is this kind of blatant example of racism and oppression when Baka, who again is a Dalit, he is supposed to announce that he's coming down the street, untouchable, untouchable, he's supposed to say, right? And therefore, people of a higher caste will know that he's coming and be able to get out of the way because they don't want to be touched by, even if it's just brushing by a Dalit because they're picking up human and animal feces. So this short man, whom we believe is, upper caste, if not a Brahmin, is touched by Baka, but like a complete accident. And toward the bottom of 47, the guy says, "This dirty dog bumped right into me," right? And begins to really just outright berate him in the most kind of demeaning and humiliating way. And Baka on 49 says, "I have erred now," or "I have made an error now. I forgot to call. I beg your forgiveness." But this guy just won't let it go. He says on that same page, the Dalits, they don't want to work. They laze about. They ought to be wiped off the surface of the earth. I mean, kind of sounds like white supremacists, right? And this is happening in India, though. He's calling for genocide of the Dalits, basically. What's unfortunately happening with the Rohingya, the sort of Muslim population in Myanmar, formerly Burma, and what's also happening with the Uyghurs in China, also a Muslim population. That is a genocide. And so the guy actually slaps him on page 50, hits him, which is ironic, right? Because he doesn't want to be touched by, he's so adamant not to be touched, but he's willing to slap Baka. Again, this is all justified by Hinduism. I return to 57. At the bottom, there's this mantra from Ram Shri Ri Hari Narayan Sri Krishna, again, reference to, Krishna, the God. And this, is talking about Hinduism in its kind of almost pure form. This is toward the top of 58. The black shrine showing a jet black woman, and he's referring here to Kali being one of the incarnations of Vishnu, the main god, is this kind of very fierce and intense Hindu god. In fact, let me just show you Kali, if I can find it. So this is Kali. She is a mother goddess, right? But also kind of fierce, woman, as you can see from the sword and the beheading here. It says again at the top of 58, the black shrine showing a jet black woman with a flaming red tongue, 10 armed, and with a garland of skulls around her neck. That was that was called the Shrine of Kali. Krishna was the blue god who played the flute in the colored pictures. And then a little bit further down, next paragraph, he, Baka, realized that an untouchable going into a temple polluted it past purification. But that's exactly what we have, right? We have on page 60 and 61 is that he actually is fascinated by, Hinduism, not Christianity, as we learn later. And he goes into the temple in 61, and people are saying, polluted, polluted, you have defiled our temple, right? So, yeah, it's pretty hypocritical, I would think. It's on 62 and 63, by the way, where Hinduism, sees its most hypocritical light when in the middle of the page, this is where we have the priest who asks Sohini to come and, hey, take care of my place and bring me water from day to day. Ask your father, not ask your father, tell your father. And because, he's a Brahmin priest, she does. And so in the middle of that page, it says she's calling out the priest to her older brother. That man, she said, that man made suggestions to me when I was cleaning the lavatory of his house there. And when I screamed, he came out shouting that he had been defiled, right? To use the untouchability as like, oh no, I'm gonna, uh, remove any kind of suspicion of me by diverting attention basically from the real issue of sexual molestation or abuse to she touched me, And on the next page 63, she says, he just teased me. She at last yielded. And then when I was bending down to work, he came and held me by my breasts. Well, clearly hypocrisy going on by a priest, which unfortunately we find all too often in Christianity as well, in other religions. So, yeah, there are a number of places in the text where you could point to, Hinduism as perhaps being the source of Dalits' oppression. If you look at page 130, this is a kind of juxtaposition of Hinduism versus Christianity. When in this scene, this is Colonel George Hutchison and his super racist wife, Mary Hutchison, talking about, Hinduism or salvation in Christianity. And Baka, in sort of the middle of the page, says, as a Hindu, or really the narrator, as a Hindu, he, Baka, didn't believe in the judgment day, right? Because that's not part of Hinduism. There is no judgment day like Christ is going to come again, because there's reincarnation, eternal recurrence. And the German philosopher Nietzsche said. And he just accepted the fact. He had been told that people who died were reborn in some form or other. He dreaded that he should be reborn as a donkey or a dog. But all that didn't disturb him, right? Then on 146, Gandhi has come on the scene, and he says, first into the paragraph on 146, and Gandhi speaking here to the people. As you all know, while we are asking for freedom from the grip of a foreign nation, Britain, we have ourselves for centuries trampled underfoot millions of human beings without feeling the slightest remorse for our iniquity or wickedness. For me, the question of these people is moral and religious. When I undertook to fast unto death for their sake, it was in obedience to the call of my conscience. And then a little bit further down, I regard untouchability as the greatest blot on Hinduism. So again, my question was like, all right, let's say, you know, does it remove the racism, to say, all right, let's take the Dalits, in other words, get rid of the caste system, let's say, and say everyone are equal. This is some ways tied to the final question here of colorism, right? Because as I showed you with those Dalits and the Aboriginal Australians or Indigenous Australians, they're of a different genetic composition, skin, hair, facial features, and so on. So it's a matter of DNA. And you have to wonder, right? Well, if Hinduism says, like Gandhi, who himself is darker or was darker, like, oh, it's a blot on Hinduism, so let's do away with untouchability. Is that really going to erase racism, right? Which is, part of the reason I put this at the very top of our, as a sort of motto, if you will, of our course. Yeah, if you haven't seen that James Baldwin quote, that's kind of resonant through all of the novels we're going to look at. Let me look at some of the issues of toilets, if you will, and latrines that speak to the issue or question number 4 about indoor plumbing. So if you look at, let's say, page 30, it's all throughout, but sprinkled here and there. Page 13, it's first mentioned in the first paragraph, or first indented paragraph, when Laka, the father, says, "Get up and attend to the latrines, or the sepoys will be angry." The sepoys being the people like Chadrat Singh, who are in charge of the barracks and whatnot. But it's also really mentioned early on in the opening page, on page 9, when it says that Laka and his family were in charge of 3 rows of public latrines, which lined the extremist end of the colony, right? So they were assigned, public latrines to clean. Or let's see, already mentioned on 22, 23, when she has to get water. So Heaney does, because of there's no running water for the latrines, right, to make them flush. Or on page, say, 73, at the bottom of the page, Vaca laid aside the broom and tried hard to be the good cricketer he usually was, but the thin paper-like pancake floated in the air and fell like a kite onto the brick pavement of the gully. By the way, at this point, he has gone to a woman's house to clean the gutter, and out there is this little boy of hers who is incredibly disrespectful to Baca and others. And he just goes out there and defecates in the gutter, in the street. And as sort of a reward for cleaning up the excrement, she throws out, this bread, or like a pancake, to him. And you're not giving it by hand, but like throws it out the window. He picked it up because it fell on the ground, right? He picked it up quietly and wrapped it in a duster with the other bread he had received. He was too disgusted to clean the drain after this, especially as the little boy sat relieving himself before him, right? Just the lack of, what we take for granted, running water, infrastructure, indoor plumbing. let's see, page 155, another issue of the latrine or flush system. This is when the poet, if you will, which we might, say is the sort of voice of Anand Becker, is speaking, and he says in the middle of 155, well, we must destroy caste. We must destroy the inequalities of birth and unalterable vocations, which is what Ambedkar really said and enshrined in their Indian constitution. We must recognize an equality of rights, privileges, and opportunities for everyone. The Mahatma, meaning Gandhi, the Mahatma didn't say so, but the legal and sociological basis of caste having been broken down by the British Indian Penal Code, which recognizes the rights of every man before a court, caste is now mainly governed by profession. When the sweepers change their profession, they will no longer remain untouchables. And they can do that soon. For the first thing we will do, we accept the machine, meaning the toilet, will be to introduce the machine which clears dung without anyone having to handle it, the flush system. Then the sweepers can be free from the stigma of untouchability and assume the dignity of status that is their right as useful members of a casteless and classless society. So again, this speaks to, would indoor plumbing or the flush system, the machine, the toilet, would it really, remove this kind of racism and untouchability? People seem to think so, but one has to wonder. I'm going to move on to the third question about Gandhi himself. He says untouchability is a sin, but wanted to complicate that and say, does it help to say that or think that in the novel? So let's look at 108 to 109 when they first hear word that Gandhi's coming. Let's see. This is Havildar Charat Singh, the old cricketer, who has the hockey stick the almost new hockey stick that he gives Baka. So this is on the one hand, the bottom of 108, he actually with his own hands serves Baka tea, which is sort of this honor to be served by someone who's kind of above him. And then on 109, second and into paragraph, it says, his face was hot with the tea, his teeth shone even in their slavish smile. His whole body and mind were tense with admiration and gratitude to his benefactor, as Baka's body was that way. What has happened to change my kismet or fate all of a sudden, he asked himself, since kindness from the Havildar, who is a Hindu and one of the most important men about the regiment. So this kind of introduces us to this notion that Gandhi kind of tells us on page, a little bit later on 146, that, people should be treated equally. Let's think of Christ's Sermon on the Mount, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's a sense of equality, right? Would that all people actually practiced what they preached? So here on 146 to 148, I already mentioned there in the middle of 146 that Gandhi thinks that it's a blot, the greatest blot on Hinduism, that is untouchability. On the next page, he says untouchability is a sin. In the paragraph, I was at Nellore, he says, this is Gandhi, I do want to attain spiritual deliverance. I do not want to be reborn, right? Because there's this notion in Hinduism of reincarnation. But if I have to be reborn, I should wish to be reborn as an untouchable, so that I may share their sorrows, sufferings, and the affronts leveled at them, in order that I may endure to free myself from them and their miserable condition. Therefore, I prayed that if I should be born again, I should be so, not as a Brahmin, Kshatra, Vaishya, Sudra, but as an outcast, as an untouchable. Okay, but that's not really how Hinduism works, right? It's based on your deeds in life, your karma. It's not that you're praying for something and it comes true, like in, say, Christianity. Um, the middle of 148, uh, they claim to be Hindus. They read the scriptures. If, therefore, the Hindus oppress them, that is, the Dalits, they should understand that the fault does not lie in the Hindu religion, but in those who profess it. In order to emancipate themselves, they have to purify themselves. So think again back to the priest who molests Sohini, right? He's supposed to be, a man of purity at the very top of Brahman, but he himself is the one who needs to be purified, right? Which is what Gandhi's pointing out here. In other words, you have a bunch of hypocrites who practice one thing but don't actually, who preach one thing, excuse me, don't really practice it. Moving on to question number 4 about the specter of colonial oppression, meaning the Brits. It begins on page 9 when we learn that they're in charge of taking care of the latrines for the Tommies, as they're called, on page 9, the British soldiers. It occurs again on, say, page 38, when toward the middle of the page, the son of the Babu, Babu, by the way, being, important man or person, typically a Brahmin, but also could be even a British soldier because they're of a more important rank, if you will. The son of the Babus being influential with the captain of the regimental hockey team, right? The regiment, meaning the British regiment, because of the exalted position of their father, had a dozen or so discarded hockey sticks given them, right? Or on the next page, you have this whole kind of discussion about the Brits at the Tommy's barracks, they're called. And one of the things that, if you have actually really read this, that becomes kind of curious about Baka, but not surprising, is that he wants to dress like a Brit, right? He looks at the English uniforms, right? He's sort of mesmerized by the Western clothing. Trying to find that exactly. He wants a hat, right, by one of the Brits, but also it comes even earlier than that. Sorry. Yeah, this is on page 12, about 10 lines on the top. And he knew, of course, that except for his English clothes, there was nothing English in his life, right? But he kept up his new form, rigidly adhering to his clothes day and night and guarding them from all base taint of Indianness. And he's here talking about the, in kind of important Havildar Charat Singh, who takes care of. So, what we might call sumptuary laws, which are laws based on dress, become an important, sorry, based on your rank, your profession, right? We see this a lot in Shakespeare's plays and in the medieval era, that only certain people are allowed to wear certain kinds of clothing, garments, and thread and material. Um, so, it's literally kind of ingrained in societies. Let's see, on 122, oh, yeah, of course, 121, 22, 23, and following. Um, Beginning on 121, you have the introduction of Colonel Hutchinson, chief of the local Salvation Army. So if you guys didn't know, you may think it's an American thing, but it's not. It began as a British thing in London, of all places, right? So this is, the colonel. He's a preacher or minister from the Salvation Army, and he is there to what we call proselytize, to spread the word of Christianity, right? And the way that his wife is mentioned in here, it ties in with not just the colonial oppression, right, but also of this next question, the last question about colorism, because I'm going to read from the very last line of page 121 over to 122. Now, though it was, and describing here the colonel's facial features, including his mustache. Now, though it was bushy, it was gray and drooped. His malicious wife said in defeat, because she alleged that the proselytizing mission of Christianity had, in his hands, been a complete failure. So he has this very dour and um, degrading and difficult and racist wife, actually. The number of conversions to his credit for the last 20 years being not more than 5, and those mainly from among the dirty black untouchables, right? So there's that colorism again, not just dirty, but black. And then it's about 10 lines down. India, however, and there's talking about her still, India, however, had embittered her. For not only did she hate the nigger servants, and that word is used by Anand, in her house, but she discovered that her husband was too studious for her gay card playing, drinking, and love making tastes. So the irony here, of course, is that this guy is a Christian Protestant Salvation Army minister there to convert the supposed heathens, if you will, of Hinduism to Christianity. Yet he's married to an overtly racist and, potentially, alcoholic and libidinal or promiscuous woman, right? The gay, not gay as in, homosexual, but happy, cheerful for her gay card playing, that is gambling, drinking, and lovemaking tastes. So, hypocrisy again. Yeah. And let's see, on 151, not a reference to the Brits. Toward the bottom of 151, last few lines. And this, by the way, is Gandhi. He says, "For it is not India's fault that it is poor. It is the world's fault that the world is rich." Right? Think back to that colonial map of, the British Empire. That is, these colonizing nations were pillaging and plundering the natural and human resources of all these countries they went in and colonized, and honestly still continue to. It really hasn't gone away. Okay, finally, some more examples about, would or how does colorism function as oppression in the novel. So let's look at, say, page 20. This is toward the bottom of the page, and the last paragraph is describing Baca's facial features, or what we call physiognomy. The blood in Baca's veins tingled with the heat as he stood before it, meaning the furnace earlier. His dark face, right? So his complexion is mentioned. His dark face, round and solid and exquisitely well-defined, lit with a queer sort of beauty. The toil of the body had been built up for him with a very fine physique, right? And so, he's got a strong, stout physicality, despite his filthy profession. But his skin is dark, just like Gandhi's. On page 44, it's toward the top of the page. If you don't know this term, you should know it, because it is used now as a kind of, it was used quite a bit in British writing, American writing, right? It simply meant dark, right? Person of dark or swarthy complexion. But it's now seen certainly as kind of a racial slur, not kind of an actual racial slur, but it's used here toward the top of 44. And they're still describing really the sort of streets and life and shops that Baca deals with. The rainbow hues of the sweetmeat stall, not to speak of the various shades of turbans and skirts, from the deep black of the windows to the green, the pink, the mauve, the fawn of the newly wedded brides, and all the tints of the shifting, changing crowd, from the Brahmin's white, so remember Brahmins are at the top, to the grass cutter's coffee and the Pathan's swarthy brown. So swarthy meaning of dark skin, right? Generally, kind of speaking or saying that, the further down, like that triangle of the caste system show, the further down the caste system you were, the darker your skin is, in part because you worked outside, but also in part from genetic kind of encapsulation inside that particular caste. Page 75, another reference to color, sort of in the middle of the page with the paragraph beginning with a mind. There was no provision for lights in the sweeper's street, so most of the inhabitants compensated themselves for the nights spent in utter darkness amid the smoke of the smothering hearth fires in their small congested houses by spending most of their time in the open air. So connoting the darkness of Dalits or Untouchables with the darkness of the night in which, they have to spend their lives because they don't have, electricity like other people. Let's see, 132. I think I may have already mentioned this though. Well, this is toward the top of 132, and this is Mary Hutchinson, the wife of the colonel, saying, "Oh, is that what you've been doing?" Because she's talking to her husband here. "Oh, is that what you've been doing? Going to these blackies again?" Blackies referring to the dark-skinned untouchables, right? And then there's one final reference on 143. When sort of importantly, in the middle of the page, Baca, finally, he gets up into a tree, kind of like Zechariah in the Bible, New Testament, and he sees Gandhi from a distance, right? And he sees that he's dark. He says, he is black like me, Baka said to himself, right? Which he was. That is, Gandhi was of darker skin. So I apologize for this being as long as it is, folks, but if you remember, I know I went over, this essay guide and questions, but I went over a lot of this syllabus information at the beginning, about where to find texts and files and slides and whatnot. So again, you have this essay that's due in module 2, a little over a week or so, on the 12th. Says here, right? Submit this 3 to 5 page essay as a Word doc, right? In module 2. This is a hard deadline. So if you miss this deadline, folks, that's 20% off of your grade. 20% is worth 2 letter grades, right? This is all laid out in the diagram here, table here. So 2 letter grades for this essay. Do not blow it off. No missed deadlines, because that's part of the what do you call it? Course policies, right? No late work would be accepted. All right, folks, be well. And if you have any questions, as always, shoot me a message in Canvas inbox. Take care. Bye.